Today we're going to look at the 5 steps to writing a hit song. I know it's a hyperbolic title, but success does leave clues. Now, I've listened to tens of thousands of tracks over the course of my life, maybe even more. And whilst many have been loved, it's relatively few that are actual hits. Now, do I like all the hits, or are they objectively good? Well, no. Don't forget, Mr. Blobby hit #1 in the UK charts. I rest my case. But there are 60,000 new tracks uploaded to Spotify every single day. So if you want your music to have any chance of standing out, it's probably a good idea to analyze what it is that actually does make a hit. So today we'll look at a few real-world examples and break them down to see if my theories are BS or whether they actually work. Now, I'm focusing on electronic dance music because that's my passion, but these 5 things can actually be applied to any genre of music. But before we get stuck into the nitty-gritty, let me just give you a quick rundown of those 5 steps for anyone who wants to save time. So here they are. Number 1, all hit tracks have got one strong theme or vibe. Number 2, they have a memorable instrument or vocal hook. Number 3, they execute a simple idea very, very well. 4, they are well produced and stand up against other tracks released in a similar era. This applies more to electronic music than song-based music. And number 5, they did something new whilst appealing to an existing format and audience. So those are the 5 main characteristics. We're going to look at how you can use each of those in your own music, and there are 3 wildcards as well, which go beyond the actual music production, and we'll be looking at how you can use those to your advantage too. So let's break each of those points down one by one. So the first, they have a strong theme or vibe, which is another way of saying they evoke a particular emotion that other people can relate to. For example, if we took Levels by Avicii, it's very uplifting. If we listen to Satisfaction by Benny Benassi, that's kind of sexy and naughty. That doesn't sound good when I say it. If you think about movies, they fall into particular categories, and music is just the same. For example, you could have horror, you could have comedy, you could have drama, you could have adventure, and even for the crossover hits and those hits that kind of merge different genres together, there's always one overriding theme. For a movie example, Shaun of the Dead is a comedy and a horror, but it's predominantly a comedy. And in Avicii's track Wake Me Up with Aloe Black, there is a nostalgic kind of country music vibe, and that nostalgia is a big part of that theme. But the main vibe of the track is a hands-in-the-air EDM banger. So how can we use this in our music? Well, it all comes down to communicating a particular vibe or emotion that we have as producers. And generally speaking, the faster you can produce the main idea, the more likely you are to be able to convey that emotion before it gets lost in the process. Because if you spend 3 hours EQing a hi-hat, you know that you're probably going to lose the impetus in delivering that main vibe that you had when you started the track. It's better instead to be content with something that sounds slightly rougher but conveys the vibe, knowing fully well that you're going to be able to polish that later on in the mixing process. 2, another way that we can use this is to use inspiration playlists. So when you hear a track you like in the genre that you produce, if you just save it into an inspiration playlist because something just captures an emotion for you, you can draw upon that for inspiration later on. It might be a chord progression, it might be a melody, it might even just be a sound on its own. But if it conveys an emotion to you and you use it, the chances are it's going to convey an emotion to someone else too. 3 is not trying to communicate multiple or too many emotions together. As we looked at before, we're talking about one main theme. If you think of your track like a company's logo, you want people to understand it straight away, understand what it's trying to communicate. So people should understand the vibe of your track very quickly, within the first few seconds. And number 4 is the biggest hits always seem to come from a place of genuine passion from that producer. This applies, of course, with songwriting as well. It's important that the track moves you personally and you're not just trying to manufacture something that's going to be a hit. Because if it doesn't move you, it's probably not going to move anyone else. I've fallen into this mistake before, especially if your paycheck depends on you pumping out another track. And that's a benefit of producing multiple ideas and just going with the one that speaks to you the strongest. As Axwell from the Swedish House Mafia says, trust the goosebumps. Step number 2, have a memorable hook. Now this could be instrumental like a melody, or it could be a vocal. For example, in Benny Benassi's Satisfaction, the hook is the bass line, but also, bizarrely, Stephen Hawking.
Push me, and then just touch me.
But the biggest hits always have a memorable hook that people could sing along in the shower or in the car. Another example would be thinking of Insomnia by Faithless.
Deep in the bosom of the gentle night.
You've got the vocal saying, I can't get no sleep, and then you've got that soaring synth riff that everyone can kind of go da, 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 at the same time when they're in the club. The more nuanced and difficult to sing along tracks might be really good, but they seldom end up being a hit. So how can we use this in our own music? Well, I would say number one is don't show off your maestro skills. This can be a trap, especially for people who have been classically trained or they've just got a lot of experience in writing music. It can be tempting to kind of show off your skills and flex your muscles, making overly intricate melodies, complex chord progressions, and these things rarely lead to having a hit track. Of course, there are exceptions to this rule, but 99% of hit tracks are simple to sing along to. The second way we can use this information is to remember to stick to a simple chord progression. Now, I see this a lot in amateur producers when they start to understand music theory and whatnot. They want to put 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 really cool chords in the progression, but most hit tracks have got 2, 3, or 4 chords in them. So as well as keeping your melody simple and singable, don't go overboard with the chord progression in most cases. Number 3 to bolstering this memorable hook is make sure that everything in the track is there for a reason to bolster that main idea and that main hook. Think about Praise You by Fatboy Slim. The vibe of the track is uplifting, he's giving praise to someone he loves. The hook is, I gotta praise you like I should, and the music conveys that message too. Everything in the composition working towards that. Think of another hit, One More Time by Daft Punk.
One more time, we're gonna celebrate.
You've got the simple hook, one more time, and all the instrumentation of the track is simply there to support that main hook. And every other part of the track that isn't the main chorus is leading people towards that chorus where they can sing along again. They're not trying to fit in loads of different ideas that conflict and take away from that main hook. Okay, step number 3, and this is kind of a combination of the first 2 points, and that's executing a simple idea very well. Now, I mean this more in the case of which elements you have in the track and which instruments you have in there, rather than the complexity of the melody itself, which we already touched upon. But a common mistake I see new producers making is when they start, their music is very simple and it sounds bad. They learn these new techniques and about how to use synthesizers and samplers, and then they overcomplicate their music with too much stuff. Now, a skilled producer, someone like Calvin Harris, who's made lots of hits, if you listen to the music, there's very few things going on harmonically and melodically, and all that nuance comes from careful layering, careful choice of sounds, careful mixing, which I call simplicity on the other side of complexity. A lot of times I see producers just putting in an extra synth riff or an extra melody line to try and fill out something that they feel doesn't sound full enough, but all of that nuance should be used to just bolster that main melody or that main hook. And if you're having to throw in loads of elements to try and get your main idea sounding good, it's probably just not strong enough in the first place. It's like having to put tomato ketchup on a delicious, well-prepared meal by a chef. If the core elements are done properly, you shouldn't really need to. Okay, so how can we use this information? Well, quite simply, don't force loads of extra stuff into your track for the sake of it. Use as few elements as possible to create the vibe that you want. Now, this is a lot easier said than done, but by removing every single thing that isn't absolutely necessary, your finished track is going to be more memorable, more hit-worthy, and the mix is going to sound way better as well, which takes us on to the next point. If you want to create extra nuance and detail to your track, consider careful layering or using automation to create dynamics throughout the entire arrangement, and filling space by using reverb and delay rather than creating a lot of new instruments. This is going to create more timbral cohesion throughout your track and reduce the risk of your idea becoming overcomplicated. Okay, number 4, hit tracks are produced well and they sound good. Now, I know that might sound completely obvious, but if you think about a hit track that's perhaps like an Ed Sheeran song, it doesn't matter if you just sing that with a guitar, which is a good point that I should have touched upon earlier. Actually, the main hook or melody should be able to be played with 2 hands on a piano or sung by a bloke with a guitar. If it sounds good like that, it's probably a strong idea. But anyway, back to this point, which is having it sound good. This is particularly important when it comes to electronic dance music because the actual audio experience is a big part of what makes dance music enjoyable. If you think about Skrillex's hits, part of what made his sound so distinctive and so enjoyable to people was the fact that it sounded awesome. It was really loud, it was really punchy and aggressive. It wasn't just a nice melody created with any sound. But how can we use this information to improve our own music? music? Well, a big part of that is to compare your music to current tracks in a similar genre that are out there now. A hit track, by definition, has to do well in the current marketplace, so if it sounds like a track that was produced 15 or 20 years ago, it's probably going to fall flat. Now, of course, practice and practice and practice is going to help your productions get to that level, but if it's not sounding at least 90% of the way there, like audibility-wise, even if it's a good idea, it's probably not going to get picked up and it's probably not going to be a hit. Now, my Accelerator program is dedicated to helping you get your music sound professional as quickly as possible, but another way that you can kind of get around it is to team up with people who can bolster your weaknesses and complement your strengths. For example, you might be really good at writing melodies, at writing hooks, but your sound design and your mixing just isn't up to scratch for current day industry standards. If you team up with someone who's not that great at writing hooks but is fantastic at sound design, the tracks that you come up with are more likely going to be way better than what either of you could produce on your own. Win-win. You'll also have someone to bounce ideas off and get feedback, which is hugely valuable. Think about those big teams of writers with the biggest pop tracks. There might be 5, 6, 7 people involved, sat down in a room, bouncing ideas off each other, keeping the strongest ones and killing the weakest ones. Oh, that sounds dark. It's like Hunger Games, but for music. So step number 5 that I've determined is that hit tracks take an existing genre or an existing audience, and the music that they write already fits in to that little niche, but then pushes things a bit further. Now, this is a really important one because many producers, when they start, they just want to be super original. But if you think back to any hit track, it's usually a spectrum of originality. So it's not binary or not. It's not like this isn't original and this is. It's usually, okay, 80% of that sounds like other tracks in that genre, and that last 20% is just trying something different with some of the sounds. So it's accessible to the audience that already exists, because if you do something completely crazy like just slapping a fish on your face to create a new track, it's going to sound rubbish. Well, I don't know, actually, it might sound amazing, but it's not very likely. Whereas if you stand on the shoulders of giants, use the new technology that's coming out all the time and just push things a bit further, that tends to be what the massive hit tracks have done. So how can we use this information in our own music? So the first thing to do is to listen to a lot of music in the genre that you're producing, including some of the hits. Then analyze what in that genre is absolutely essential. For example, if it's a house music track, you're going to have a kick on every beat, you're probably going to have a clap or a snare, and you're going to have some hi-hats, okay? You'll also have a bass line. Perhaps you can switch that bass line for some crazy sound. Perhaps you can add some more tribal drums in between those other beats. But by determining what's essential and what can be changed, then it gives you some scope for experimentation and reduces the risk of completely alienating the audience and producing something that no one can relate to. Tip number 2 within this category is to listen to a lot of other music that's outside of your genre, especially older music that perhaps influenced some of the artists that you enjoy listening to. It's an incredible wealth of musical information, musical nuance that you can draw upon and perhaps bring into your own music. For example, some of the more recent Calvin Harris stuff really sounds like it was produced in the 70s to a degree, but it's been reimagined in a modern format, so kind of already sounds familiar to people. Another tip regarding this is don't reinvent the wheel when it comes to the arrangement. I can't think of any hit track that is a hit track because the arrangement was really different from other music in that genre. And the popular arrangements, that is to say when the verse hits, when the chorus hits, when the breaks hits, they're there for a reason. Like, it's taken decades, probably centuries to develop what works well in an arrangement. So trying to reinvent the wheel there is probably a waste of time, and that's not where your efforts are best focused. So you can bring a track into your DAW and you can dissect what's happening in certain points. You can say, okay, the drop's happening here, okay, the break's happening here, and you can use that as a template to map out your own ideas, focusing on giving the originality and the zest and the hitmaker stuff within a tried and tested template. This will allow people to understand and digest your music whilst introducing them to something fresh that moves and excites them. Okay, now we are on to the wild cards. These are things that are beyond the music production, but they are vitally important to have a hit track. The first is, and this isn't essential actually, so forget what I just said a second ago, but quite often a really good music video can help with making a track into a hit. Of course, if the track itself is rubbish, then the video probably isn't going to prop that up, but if you've got a good track and an amazing music video, it's like a nitro injection for that track. And number 2 kind of ties into that, ties into point 1, and that's marketing. A hit track, by definition, is popular and listened to a lot, so people actually have to be introduced to your music, and that's what marketing is. Big record labels, of course, can help with that because they've got a lot of experience, they've got teams on board, they've got bigger budgets, and they can really help boost a track. But, of course, in this day and age with social media, that's not absolutely essential. And there are plenty of examples of viral hits that have just grown organically, kind of from a grassroots level, without the help of a big label. But regardless of how it happens, the marketing is an important part of what makes a hit track. And number 3 is kind of luck. And I don't like to use luck because people often use it as an excuse, and really the best definition I heard was luck tends to be an excuse by which the ignorant excuse themselves. And all it means is there are millions of things going on around the world all at once that you can't possibly understand and possibly know. For example, you might release your track when someone else has released a very similar track at the same time, or perhaps a huge artist has released a track the week before that you couldn't possibly know about. Maybe a movie comes out just as your track is released and your track ties in nicely to the theme of this huge blockbuster hit movie. My point is, there are certain things that are way beyond our control, and all we can do is improve our odds in these situations. So how do you become lucky? Well, you make connections, you output more music, you practice, and you keep on doing it. Quite often when a producer has a hit track, especially if they haven't really been famous before, people say, oh, overnight success this, overnight success that. But the reality is they've usually been working hard for 10 years or more behind the scenes, putting that work in, improving their odds until everything comes together at the right place at the right time. If you follow all of the steps that we've already covered and you do it regularly, so you're releasing a track every couple of weeks or every month, your skills are going to improve. Your odds of getting lucky are going to improve. Your connections within the industry are going to improve, which again is going to improve your luck. So if I had to summarize, the key points here are a catchy, memorable hook, listen to a lot of music, output a lot, and try and cut out everything that isn't working towards this main theme. Now, if you would like help with that, if you want to get your music sounding professional as quickly as possible and have the accountability to do it regularly, do check out my Accelerator program below this video. Some of our students, whilst perhaps not reaching billions of streams, have certainly got millions of streams and got signed to some of their favorite labels. It's only a matter of time before one of them has an absolute massive hit. And maybe, just maybe, that could be you. Now, once you've written a really, really good track, a way, as I said, to help get that out to people is by using a record label. And if you want to get signed to a very good record label, your favorite record label, I've actually put together some bulletproof tips in this video here that has already helped hundreds of my students get signed to record labels. So do check that out. But before you go over there, if you enjoyed this video, please like it, share it, and consider subscribing to my channel for music production tips each and every week. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you over at that next video.